Have you ever noticed that when you have a deadline, the day is so short and passes so quickly? But when you're waiting for important news, it is excruciatingly long. Which is true? Is a day too long or is it too short? Have you ever tried to reassure someone who is afraid that the thing they are afraid of is in fact not scary? Are roller coasters scary or aren't they? Was Holmes right or Watson? What about the assertion, this statement is false? It has been called the liar's paradox because if this statement is false, is true, then the statement is false, which would actually in turn mean that it is actually true, but this would mean that it is false. Similarly, if this statement is false, then the sentence is true, which would in turn mean that it is actually false, but this would mean that it is true. When I was in rabbinical school so many years ago, Leonard Fine, Jewish activist and founder of Moment magazine and Mazon, came to speak to us at HUC. He began his talk by saying, I am going to tell you a story. It is a true story I made up about 5 years ago. The compelling reason we love stories, he said, is that they do not have to have happened in order to be true. I was very moved by this and have repeated it many times in response to the question of whether or not the Torah is true. Yes, I always say, I believe the Torah to be true. Not factual, not even historically accurate, but true nonetheless. Because I do not think of Torah as a history book or a science book. Purporting to be either one of those, Torah would be a sad failure, full of inconsistencies, factual errors, biases. I think of Torah as the unfolding story of my people and our God. Remember back in the 1960s when feminists came up with the neologism, her story? Well, I'll coin a phrase now and call the Torah a book of our story. It doesn't matter to me whether the stories are factual. They are still true. They just offer different truths than science and history do. History can tell us when things happened, and science can tell us how. The Torah prompts us instead to ask, whether factual or fictional, what do the events mean for our lives as human beings and as Jews? What makes the text sacred is that it teaches us how to live holy lives in God's image and God's presence, and moves us to work for tikkun, repair in our broken world. I think it comes down to defining our terms. To my computer's thesaurus, factual and accurate are synonyms for true. To me, where Torah is concerned, they are not. And in fact, emet, the Hebrew for true, is not given as an option for the Hebrew translations of factual, which is uvdati, or accurate, which is meduyak. Emet comes from the same root as emunah, belief, faith, or trust. And the very definition of belief and faith is that they are not matters of fact. Another interesting thing about emet is that it is made up of the first, middle, and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Mem, Tav, symbolizing that it contains within it all possible words, that it is all-encompassing, and we have to expand our minds to embrace it. Take, for example, the Torah portion that we read here on Rosh Hashanah morning. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I believe there is great truth in the Torah's story of creation in 7 days, although I do not take it literally. Science tells me otherwise. So I assert that the Torah is true, though not necessarily factual, and that evolution is factual, but not the whole story. Rabbi Barry Block writes, "Most creationists relate to evolutionists as if they have no soul, and most evolutionists relate to the creationists as if they have no brain. Since, according to Jewish tradition, we all possess both, this is where our discussion should begin. No small feat in a culture in which the absolute obliteration of the other side's views is often the only basis for thinking our own is correct. Such thinking is totally inconsistent with the Jewish intellectual tradition of healthy debate, the acceptance of multiple positions on complex issues. As Jews, we are used to the idea of pluralities of interpretations, of multiple truths. It's famously expressed in Tevye's Tavern Conundrum. When caught in the middle of an argument between two men, he agrees with each of them. The third man asks, "How can they both be right?" And Tevye answers, "You know, you are also right." This is Jewish biblical interpretation in a nutshell. A disciple of Hillel taught in the Mishnah, "Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba d'chol ba," turn it and turn it, for all is included in it. The question of multiple truths comes up in another story from the book of Numbers. As the Israelites are poised to enter the promised land, Moses sends 12 scouts out as an advance team to report on what lay ahead. Upon their return, 10 of the scouts say, "We came to the land you sent us to. The people who inhabit the country are powerful and the cities are fortified and very large. The land is one that devours its settlers. The people are giants. We cannot overcome that people. We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them." Then Joshua and Caleb say, "The land is an exceedingly good land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Have no fear of the people there. God is with us." They all went together into the same territory. 10 saw scary giants and said, "We can't do this." 2 saw milk and honey and said, "Yes, we can, because God is with us." Which group was telling the truth? According to the Torah, the 10 scouts committed a terrible sin by discouraging the conquest, which resulted in denial of admission to the promised land for that whole generation, except for Caleb and Joshua. But did the 10 scouts say anything that was untrue? They merely described what they saw and offered their truth about their chances for success. Why were they punished so severely for doing the job they were sent to do? Perhaps the reason for their punishment is that they insisted that their perception was the absolute truth. The great Hasidic sage Menachem Mendel of Kotsk said, "The truth is not necessarily as things appear." The 10 scouts believed that their perspective was the only truth and refused to acknowledge that perhaps a different or greater truth may have been hidden from their view. So often, we too insist that there can be only one truth, and too often we insist that our truth is the only truth. We adhere so ardently to our perspective that we lose sight of the great wisdom that can be found in another's understanding of what is real and good and true. Like the scouts, when we seal off our souls and ward off truths different from our own, we commit idolatry of the self and condemn yet another generation to wander in the wilderness. So where truth is concerned, we can learn from Genesis that there's a difference between factuality and truth. And from the Scouts, we learned that conflicting perspectives on the same fact can both be true. Which brings me back to defining our terms. How do we understand truth? Over the last few years, I've become more cautious expressing my views about the truth of Torah because truth itself has come under attack. And it seems in our current political climate, the meanings of truth and fact have become blurry. In April 2016, Time magazine's cover asked, "Is truth dead?" In December of that year, Oxford Dictionary's word of the year was post-truth. Since then, no less than 15 books have been published with post-truth in the title. Post-truth is defined by Oxford as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. If my view about Torah and truth holds, which I still think it does, then as Jews we have lived in a post-truth era not just for the last few years, but since we all stood at Sinai to enter the covenant, which to me is true even though obviously you and I were not actually physically there. Israeli scholar Yuval Noah Harari writes, "Are we living in a post-truth era? Yes, but that's because we're a post-truth species. Shared fictions in the form of news, religions, novels, sports, money, even brands, fill our lives, but that's okay. It's these shared beliefs that have helped humans cooperate and conquer the planet." What I think should give us pause is not that we are influenced by emotion and belief, but rather our inclination to accept any given truth without question. Facts are important. Perspectives are important, but questioning is crucial. As Jews, we are taught to question what we are taught. Our patriarch Abraham is our role model for questioning when he challenges God's impulse to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. In one of the many post-truth books, Boston University philosophy professor Lee McIntyre says, "At some level, all ideologies are an enemy of the process by which truth is discovered." All ideologies. If those ideologies are accepted without question, if they become closed systems of absolutes. Cambridge University philosopher Simon Blackburn writes that truth is attainable only at the vanishing endpoints of inquiry, adding that instead of facts first, we may do better if we think of inquiry first, with the notion of fact humbly waiting to be invited to the feast afterward. Which raises another important aspect required of truth, humility. In the practice of Musar, the cultivation of positive character traits or midot, humility is almost universally taught first because it is a fundamental component of all the other traits. Humility in the Musar tradition is finding the golden mean between self-effacement and arrogance. We can only really ascertain truth when we approach it with humility and openness to the possibility of another perspective. Rabbi Ilana Goldhaber-Gordon studied science before she became a rabbi. She notes that in the science laboratory, the facts themselves are uninteresting. What makes or breaks the scientist is what they do with the facts. Truth has to be meaningful, she writes. A truth is a story we tell based on the facts that we know, and it is in that leap from fact-finding to storytelling, that all types of misunderstandings, mistakes, and sometimes even deceptions can slip in. She notes that in the laboratory, a scientist has the power to control the parameters of the experiment. Each experiment yields a limited set of facts around which a scientist can tell a small story. But outside the laboratory, we don't have the luxury of building our truths one careful pixel at a time. Events rush past us at every moment, far too many for one mind to contain. So our brains select out the data that are most important to our stories. That's why it is so important to seek out diverse voices as we go about trying to understand our world. The well-known tale of three blind men describing an elephant reminds us that no individual can ever claim full understanding of the truth. We humans have partial knowledge with many limits. Our own experience, our cognitive bias, our cultural framework, our limited time compared to the vastness of possible knowledge. But together, we are much more than three blind men feeling out an elephant. Consider 300 people or 3,000 people of many backgrounds and experiences exploring what would have to be a very patient elephant. They might discover where the ear meets the head, how the leg leads to the torso, where the tusks and trunk intersect. Perhaps we would never know everything about the elephant for all times and for all elephants, but we could certainly know a lot. The more you know. Staying open and truly listening to others' perspectives, and also to inconvenient or uncomfortable facts which might undermine our own views, is essential in the pursuit of truth. I want to be clear that I am not arguing that just because somebody tells a story, that makes it true. Alternative facts are not alternative truths. Deception for personal gain is not truth. Lying is lying, and it is not acceptable. Just moments ago in our vidui, we beat our breasts and said, "Tafalnu sheker," we have dealt in lies. Isaiah says, "Hoi ha'omrim lara tov v'latov ra," woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. Truth requires honesty. Truth also depends on trust. As I said earlier, in Hebrew, emet, truth, and trust, emunah, both arise from the same root. In a 2016 review of 3 new post-truth books, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs notes that free society depends on trust, which depends on honesty in public life, which depends on truth as a norm. Trust depends on honesty, which depends on truth. I would argue also that truth depends on honesty, which engenders trust. Honesty and trustworthiness are foundational ideals upon which we build our most important relationships, in a marriage, within families, between and amongst friends, in business, in healthy political discourse, in our communities. Without trust, without faith in the words and deeds of others, all these would break down. Truth requires intellectual, emotional, and even spiritual honesty, which is why we are all here today. Yom Kippur calls on us to reflect deeply on the truths in the stories of our lives, to seek out and correct the misunderstandings, mistakes, and deceptions that have crept in. It demands that we inquire of ourselves, am I living a life of integrity, aligned with what I know to be true? Am I listening to the truths of others with an open mind and heart? do the stories I hold to be true lead me to create a better, more just, caring, happier, and holier world? Shimon ben Gamliel said the world is sustained by three things: emet, din, and shalom. Truth, justice, and peace. There can be no peace without justice, and there can be no justice without truth. The wise King Solomon urges us, emet kneh ve'al timkor, chochma umusar uvina. Attain truth and keep it close, wisdom, discipline, and understanding. It is not so easy to attain truth. It requires wisdom, discipline, and understanding, trust and integrity, acceptance of the facts, including those we don't like, and rejections of the falsehoods, including those we wish were true. It requires the ability to listen openly and hold paradox. We recite in our morning liturgy, Emet atahu rishon, Emet atahu acharon. Truth, you are first. Truth, you are last. Emet, formed of the first, middle, and last letters of the alphabet. Emet, born of trust and the foundation of peace. May we aspire to live lives of truth in the coming year, and may God help us to succeed. May we be the truth we wish to see in the world. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will.